Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review. Now, this is as you can tell, it's another another edition, of childhood favorites. And considering that the film by Disney, Maleficent, comes out the weekend that I'm recording this video originally, I decided, I haven't seen Sleeping Beauty in years. Like Mary Poppins, it's one of those films I hadn't seen in over a decade. I think I hadn't watched this film since like around 96, 97-ish. That's just going off, if I were to say a figure off the top of my head, around then. And the reason for that is, as a kid, I would watch Sleeping Beauty, but out of all the Disney films, especially the animated ones I owned, it was, I think, always my least favorite, because I'm looking up the list right here. The following are the Disney films I owned as a kid, or still have. Sorry about the dogs in the background. In addition to Sleeping Beauty, there was Snow White, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi, Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatians, Sword and Stone, The Jungle Book, The Aristocats, Robin Hood, Fox and the Hound, Little Mermaid, Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, which I have to say is probably my favorite of the animated Disney films, especially the ones based on fairy tales. Aladdin, Lion King. Of course, some of these next ones I'm listing are ones that came out when I was a kid, so that's going to kind of influence one of the things I'm going to have to say in a bit. Pocahontas, Hunchback, and on. But out of all of them, this was always my least favorite. And watching it as an adult now, I could see why, because out of all the Disney films, especially the fairy tale ones, this is the one with the least interesting people in it, except for a few people. So I have to respectfully disagree with some of the online ratings. It has a 7.4. I think that's a little too high for an IMDb rating. I'd say more like a 5.0, 5.5 I could see. 80 with the audience. A little lower personally, but people like it, that's okay. 91 with the critics. I don't get that. Here's the consensus. This Disney dreamscape contains moments of grandeur with its lush colors, magical air, one of the most menacing villains in the Disney canon. I will admit that it has good colors. The animation is very good. It's very lovely to look at. It does have a very magical quality about it. And Maleficent is probably one of the best of the Disney villains, even though her motivation is just very loose, but I guess it leaves up to the imagination why she would specifically hate this kingdom. But I guess that's one thing that the new film is going to touch on in its own way, but it's a little interesting. But I'll get to it in a little bit. The film was directed by 4 people. It was directed by Les Clark, Eric Larson, and Wolfgang Reitherman under the supervision of Clyde Geronimi, who had directed some previous films. He directed Melody Time, Make Music Mine, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, which I haven't seen, Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, and 101 Dalmatians. And that was the last film apparently he directed. And it is based on a couple of different Sleeping Beauty sources. La Belle aux Bois Dormants by Charles Perrault. The Sleeping Beauty by, I'm going to have trouble with this last name, it looks Russian, Tchaikovsky. It's Tchaikovsky, which is where the music score is taken from. It makes me wonder if the main song Once Upon a Dream is from that, or if it's the melody is from the thing but the words are original. Either way, that song is beautiful and it fits the tone of the film. And Little Briar Rose by the Brothers Grimm, which I'm guessing the part about Sleeping Beauty being in the forest is taken from that, because that's her alias. Now, the film was made for about $6 million. You can kind of tell that with how the animation and stuff is, but it was basically a flop apparently, because it only made about, in its day, $51,000 when adjusted for inflation. I'm guessing it makes back, oh, a minute, hold on, no it wasn't, I was reading wrong. It's made $51 million, excuse me. So it wasn't a flop. From what I've read, though, in its day it was a commercial flop, because it was the last of the Disney adaptations of a fairy tale for some time because of its initially disappointing box office gross and mixed critical reception. So maybe that's overall box office. And it wasn't until after Walt Disney died that they returned to fairy tale adaptations, and the first one with that was The Little Mermaid. which if you look at the list, you can see why they mostly did book adaptations or other type of stuff in between there. Now for the anime, when it comes to voice actor, we got Mary Costa as Princess Aurora, the title character Sleeping Beauty. Eleanor Audley as Maleficent, which perfect casting because her voice really does fit the self-proclaimed mistress of all evil. And as you can tell, Maleficent is one of the best things about this film. A great villain, which is going to go a little bit hand in hand with one of my problems with the film. Then we got Verna Felton, Barbara Jo Allen, and Barbara Luddy as Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, the three fairies. And of course, Felton also voices Princess Aurora's mother. We got Bill Shirley as Prince Philip, our prince on the shiny charger. Taylor Holmes as King Stefan, Aurora's father. Bill Thompson as King Hubert, Philip's father. We got Marvin Miller as the narrator, which he does a good job. He has that type of voice that really fits a narrator. That's about it for the main cast. Now, the story, of course, very easy to get through. The story is, in the beginning, King Stefan and his wife welcome the birth of their daughter, Aurora. They proclaim a holiday, and subjects come to pay homage to the princess, including a friend of Stefan, another king, and his son, Prince Philip. And now King Hubert and King Stefan have always wanted their kingdoms to be united, and one has a son, one has a daughter. Hey, let's betroth them. So, just off the top, this is one of those Disney films where I really don't mind the fact that the character, the whole "you can't marry a man you just met" thing. Because although when they do eventually meet in the film, they do kind of rush a little bit into the romance, considering that their parents were going to have them get married anyway, it's a little forgivable. Though, this is going to tie in again to one of my problems with the film, which I'll bring up this little suggestion when I get there. Anyway, among the many guests are the three good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, and they each bless the child with a gift. One with the gift of song, one with the gift of beauty, and right before Merryweather can give her gift, Maleficent appears. She's a little ticked off that she wasn't invited, though, a little based upon her tone and by how she carefully words it, and how everyone acts. There's probably a little bit of history there, which the new film's going to dive into, which I applauded for. I haven't seen the film yet, in case anyone's wondering. Now, she places a curse on the child that before the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she will prick her finger and die. Merryweather changes the curse where she'll just fall asleep into a sleep that looks like death, that could be awakened by true love's first kiss. And of course, the fairies eventually take Aurora into custody to keep her hidden from Maleficent, and it works right until the day she turns 16. And of course, you can tell eventually the curse comes true, and Philip has to save the day. And he eventually does. Evils overcome, happy ever after. I have no qualms about spoiling that part because it's a fairy tale. We all know it's going to end with some form of happily ever after, especially when it's done by Disney. Now, I have to say my main problem with the film is that Princess Aurora and Prince Philip, voice acting wise they're good, but writing wise they're really just not that interesting, which is kind of sad. Aurora just feels like a cookie cutter archetypical princess, and the same thing with Philip. The only reason you really want them to succeed is because it's the archetype, it's a fairy tale, and you want to see good triumph over evil. But with how good Maleficent is as being a villain, I guess depending on who you ask, they might want her to win, and then might be disappointed when she loses. It's going to depend on who you ask, but me, the only reason I was cheering for Philip and Aurora is like they're the archetypal ones, and Maleficent is just so good at being a bad guy that you really want to see her overcome. Now, on the flip side, the fairies are very interesting characters. They have a little back and forth between them, pink, blue, a little bit of that, which kind of causes a downfall at one point in the film. And they're just very interesting to listen to. They seem to be the actual heroes of it, especially since they're the ones that give Philip the tools and guidance that eventually allows him to overcome Maleficent. So in essence, he's basically just their tool, I guess you could say. Now, there's one thing while watching it that came to mind. I'm like, that would have been a way to improve the film, would have added a little bit more depth to the characters, and would have made their romance a little bit more believable. Now with the whole Once Upon a Dream thing, them going into the forest, you could have made it like Aurora's like, yeah, okay, I don't talk to anyone. But maybe she's been talking to Philip secretly for years. She doesn't know he's the prince. Obviously, he's not supposed to know she's the princess. He thinks she's just a peasant. And slowly they've been falling in love, and now this is the time that she's about to turn 16. He knows that the princess is going to come out of hiding, so he's like, I have to tell her and all that. It could go from there, and that could add a little bit of attention to Philip and his father when he tells his father he's in love with a peasant girl without realizing it's the princess. Add a little bit more depth to them instead of them just being cookie-cutter characters. I mean, even their parents are a little bit more interesting when the kings have that little discussion when they're getting drunk on wine. You get into that little mock argument with the fish in the plate. They're a little bit more interesting, and that is the main weakness of this film, is that our two lead characters, especially our title character, are really not that interesting. Now, I know someone's going to say, well, the same thing with Snow White. True. I'd say the prince is more of a cookie-cutter character in that film than Snow White. She's slightly, but she has a little charm about her. And also, unlike this film, Snow White being the first one, it is a little forgivable. Since it was the first film and they didn't know they were going to make another one. They called Snow White Disney's, I forget if it was going to be, I forget what word it was. It was something like, I forget exactly what it was, but they were basically saying, oh, that's going to bankrupt Disney. That's basically what they called it, without me actually remembering the actual title. And of course, that one also has a great villain in the Queen, and it also has the dwarf, so it has interesting characters all around. And also, Snow White has that charming naivete about her. Whereas Aurora, there's a little bit of that. It's just the way the story flows and all that. She just doesn't seem that interesting. Which is probably the reason I didn't watch this movie that much as a kid, because I noticed that, and I'm like, nah, I'd rather watch more interesting ones, like the ones that I grew up with in the Disney Renaissance. Those ones had more interesting protagonists. I mean, even Pocahontas, for the slight problems that film has, at least the protagonists in that film are interesting. Whereas in here, it's like, when's Maleficent going to come back on screen? I mean, I like the music and I like the animation, but that's not really a whole lot to really repeatedly watch this. Maybe as a kid watching it, you can forgive the fact that the protagonists aren't interesting, but as an adult, just not one I'd watch a lot. Other than Maleficent, because I have to say, Maleficent, like I've already said a couple times, is probably one of the best things about this movie, and she's also one of the better Disney villains, which is why I'm glad they actually had her be the lead Disney villain in Kingdom Hearts. I do wonder why they made Hook number 2 when they play up his cowardice a lot in the Disney canon, but that's them. They don't want to make him too evil and too frightening. The live-action films do that enough. Now, what do I give this film as a rating? Well, it does have that big problem. So I'd have to give it a 3 out of 5 for the things I like about it. The animation, music, some of the comedy stuff in the film is very funny. Maleficent is an excellent bad guy, or villainous, I should say. How the story flows is interesting, even though it does kind of, go to a slight halt when Philip and Aurora are on screen, because that's just the main problem of the film is them. And no, I could see why back in the day when this film came out it got disappointing critical reaction, because that would be a problem even then. Because look at the films that were made around it. Let me bring it up. The films that preceded it. These are the 4 films that preceded it: Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and Lady and the Tramp. Especially the one right before, Lady and the Tramp, a couple years before. And then the ones that followed it were 101 Dalmatians, The Sword and the Stone, and The Jungle Book. I think you can see why. Well, like I said, 3 out of 5. If you're a fan of this film, don't shoot the messenger. That's just my personal opinion. I'm not saying you can't love the film. If you've never seen the film, I'd say this is probably the animated Disney film I would recommend the least. I would recommend films like The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Sword and the Stone, Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatians, even Robin Hood, among others, over this.